Today we will be talking about the social theorist Georg Simmel. Simmel was born in Berlin in 1858. Little is known about his life as nobody has taken the time to write a biography about Simmel. He was born into a Jewish family that converted to Lutheranism. His father was an upper-class businessman. His father died when Simmel was a teenager, and thus Simmel was adopted by the wealthy owner of a music publishing house. It is for this reason that Simmel was able to pursue a career as a scholar. Simmel studied philosophy at Humboldt University in Berlin. He was considered to be somewhat of an academic outsider, rejected not so much on the basis of the merit of his scholarly contribution, but rather on the basis of his Jewish background. He was a good friend of Max Weber, and Weber tried to get him certain academic appointments as Weber was able to recognize Simmel's genius, though Simmel was ultimately rejected from these positions, even with the support of Weber and the recommendation from Weber. He was married and had one child, and it's worth noting that he had a secret affair with his assistant, who had a daughter, though this was kept a secret until after Simmel had passed. Simmel co-founded the German Society for Sociology in 1909. During World War I, universities were not functioning, lecture halls were turned into military hospitals, and therefore Simmel retreated to the Black Forest, where he would write. He would die of liver cancer in 1918. Okay, so we will be discussing two very short essays today, the first being The Metropolis in Mental Life. Simmel talks about how in modernized society, human beings have gained more and more individuality, though we have also become more reliant and more interdependent on one another. There is a discussion of certain stimuli that those who live in large cities have to be cognizant of in comparison to the lack of stimuli that folks in, let's say, smaller towns have to get used to. He writes on this: lasting impressions, the slightness in their differences, the habituated regularity of their course and contrast between them, consume, so to speak, less mental energy than the rapid telescoping of changing images, pronounced differences within what is grasped at a single glance, and the unexpectedness of violent stimuli. To the extent that the metropolis creates these psychological conditions with every crossing of the street, with the tempo and the multiplicity of economic, occupational, and social life, it creates in the sensory foundations of mental life and in the degree of awareness necessitated by our organization as creatures dependent on differences, a deep contrast with the slower, more habitual, more smoothly flowing rhythm of the sensory mental phase of small town and rural existence. He goes on to write that metropolis life is more likely to be purely a matter of cold, calculating, matter-of-fact type of attitude of all persons and things. There is an indifference to the distinctions between things and people. There's also a sort of lack of care for anything that revolves around personal value. Money reduces all value to exchange value, making individuality a purely quantitative matter. There is human relations become sort of obligational, as opposed to maybe the more sentimental and emotional relations that Simmel says comprise human relations in rural societies. Everything is reduced to its quantitative value instead of having these more human and sentimental and emotional meanings assigned to relations. I'm going to also point out that there's a bit of an overlap between Simmel, Weber, and Marx in this sort of description of the nature of economic egoism, as he puts it, this sort of cold, calculated matter-of-factness that dominates in a society that revolves around capital. So to illustrate this type of matter-of-factness, he writes that London has never acted as the heart of England. He says that there's not really heart in the major metropolitan area of England that is London, but rather it has acted as its intellect and its money bag. It operates more with the head than with the heart, so to speak. There's, of course, there's a double-edged sword to this description. Simmel, who himself was a metropolitan residing in Berlin, was perhaps, you could say, a bit smug in looking down at the sort of what he would imply to be anti-intellectual and mentally lethargic population in the rural areas. The financial side of life has dominated social life in the metropolis, where all human and emotional and sentimental value drowns in this sort of in the more calculating value of finance. And he again turns to this description by saying that cold calculation of enumeration turns all that is qualitative into quantitative terms. What is particular to city life is what he refers to as a blasé attitude or a blasé outlook. The blasé attitude is to be indifferent toward the distinction between things. So meaning and value that comprise the distinction between things in society are considered to be utterly meaningless to the person with the blasé attitude. City folk tend to have this blasé attitude as they are indifferent to all that which is qualitative and revolve their understanding of the world around that which can be cold and calculated in terms of its economic value. Small town folks see city folk as being sort of rude and cold and only calculating and not really appealing to one another's humanity, perhaps the stereotypes that you're already familiar with. Whereas city folk, he says, claims that to see small town folk as being perhaps a bit slow and a bit dim, yet another stereotype that you're probably familiar with. This sort of mutual strangeness between those who live in the city and those who live in rural areas can also turn to a mutual dislike of one another, as our etiquette and our standards of what makes very valuable human relations are completely different and are operating at incompatible levels. And this mutual dislike of one another can lead to feelings of hatred or even conflict. Okay, now we will turn to an even shorter essay called The Stranger. The stranger is not a wanderer, Simmel says. He's very clear at the outset of this essay saying that the stranger is not the person who comes today and is gone tomorrow. He's not the person who pops into your town just to get gas and then leaves. He is the person who comes into your town from elsewhere and stays. The stranger's position in a group is determined by the fact that the stranger has not been a part of this group in the beginning. We interpret the stranger as being first and foremost separate from us if they are entering the in-group. The stranger thus puts qualities into the group that they are entering that appear foreign and which did not originate from the group itself. Thus, with their nearness, their new coming to this community, they also have a distance embedded in their nearness. There is what Simmel describes as a simultaneous nearness and distance going on. So, feelings of closeness to the stranger can be based on feelings of common elements. We can, of course, have things in common with strangers. Elements that he uses include national elements, social elements, occupational elements that we might have in common with the stranger that might give us a sense of closeness to them. He also sidetracks a little bit. I don't know if some of you caught it, where he starts talking about romantic relationships where strangeness is perceived in a more positive light, where a romantic relationship's allure to those who are participating in it revolves around its uniqueness, the feeling that this type of love has never before existed, though this allure disappears when those involved in the relationship recognize that this type of love has existed in thousands of instances before, when their loving relationship no longer appears to be unique. When common elements are perceived, the love for the couple will that they feel for one another, the love between them will likely evaporate. Simmel then reiterates that the stranger is both near and far at the same time. Sometimes the only common element rests in the fact that both the stranger and the group he is entering in have a common humanity. But even within this simultaneous nearness and distance, people who perceive the stranger tend to emphasize the non-common elements, the ways in which we are different, we tend to emphasize, and the things that we have in common, we tend to overlook. We tend to minimize what we have in common and emphasize the things we do not have in common. The strangeness of a person who might come from a different nation or race or city is not strange because of his individual character. It has very little to do with what they are saying and doing and acting and the way that their personality presents itself, but rather on the basis of the fact that they come from a different group, that their strangeness of origin, their non-common element within this relation is what we revolve our perception of them around. Strangers are thus not really seen as individuals. When we emphasize this non-common element and we don't think about their individual character so much, those who make that perception of the stranger do not see them necessarily as individuals, but rather attach their individuality to the more umbrella term of the category that makes them different from us. So it's on the basis of a certain type rather than on a certain person. Simmel, of course, might be writing in somewhat biographical terms, with his frustration with the fact that he was often being rejected from the university halls, not on the basis of his work, but on the basis of his Jewish background.